Excellent. So we are live on our first live broadcast with Bill Imber of GM Imber and Sons. I'm Adam from Magic Air. Most of you already know me, but a little bit about me later on. We're going to give it a few moments for some people to join in on the stream, because I do know there's a couple of people planning on joining us. So we'll give it a few moments and then we'll get started. It's our first stream, so do bear with us on any technical issues, as it were. I can see we've got a couple of people already watching there. So brilliant. First of all, Bill, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know, obviously, you're working from home at the moment, but thank you very much for joining us and taking the time to answer some questions and hopefully answer some of the worries that the industry has got regarding insurance, COVID-19, and also insurance as general. So, Bill, if you wouldn't mind, for the people that don't know you, they might be insured with a different insurer. They might not have been to the industry shows where you've got one of the most sexy looking stands at the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Imbers, or GM Imber and Sons, if you would, please.
I'm Bill Imber, the Managing Director of GM Imber and Sons. We're a family-owned and run business, currently located in Sussex. Basically, we bought part of our dad's old company out, which was GM Imber Limited, back in 2005/6, and took on the insurance portfolio, which was interesting, which we've grown. I think it's probably about 5-6 times the size it was back then.
Wow.
Which was tiny, but it was kind of more of a hobby to fit in around his other workload. So, which is mainly reinsurance, which is kind of, in layman's terms, insurance for insurance companies. What kind of goes on to help spread all the risk. So we do certain specialist things, and because reinsurance tends to happen around the new year, leisure seemed a natural fit, because most of that starts happening around about March, April, when things are really dying down on what he was doing. So it just seemed a natural fit. So we kind of started focusing on the leisure industry. He started up in 1974.
Wow.
In the 1980s, he started doing some insurance too. In 2000, I had graduated and went into full-time insurance. I started off full-time. I'd done various bits and pieces working for the family business for a while. Started full-time in a marine insurance company called Navigators and General, who are part of Zurich Insurance, based down in Brighton. Then I went from there back to work for GM Imber Limited. Then after that, things kind of, wasn't hugely happy working with the family again. Went off and worked for a company that became part of Towergate. Which is a pretty big brokers. I think they're probably 5th or 6th biggest in the UK at the moment. I was working in their corporate team, which basically meant that we only did commercial and premiums £10,000 plus. So I didn't do a lot of leisure there. Did a little bit of kind of nightclubs and hotels and things like that, and some kind of audio visual companies, but not really a lot in the leisure industry. Then 2005, one of my brothers was quite badly ill. I started another job which I didn't particularly like, and then I agreed to fill in at the family company again for a bit, just ended up sticking. At the end of that year, Dad decided he wanted to run down his involvement, and the suggestion of buying out the insurance side seemed quite good, so we could carry on with that. None of us wanted to do the foreign stuff, simply because we were quite young and we didn't want to spend 3 to 6 months a year traveling abroad. It does sound glamorous, but when you've grown up seeing your parents do it, you kind of think, well, I don't really want to do the same thing. So none of us wanted to do that, so we just set up the insurance side, and kind of worked on the products that we had going, which was kind of mainly leisure and leisure retail, so kind of musicians, market traders, craft traders, and leisure type stuff. That's not all we do. My two biggest clients aren't in the leisure industry. One is an accountant, quite a big accountant, and another one is a manufacturer of bands, as in hair bands and wristbands and face masks.
Really? They must be doing really well at the moment then with the COVID-19 happening.
Well, it's actually relaxing face masks as opposed to the ones that you wear to prevent inhalation of unfortunate substances. But yes, they've gone kind of stratospheric compared to where they were, and they went from being a fairly small business to the last year their income has increased by over 1,000%. So
wow.
I'm hoping that this doesn't curtail that too much, but they've been a kind of mini UK success story, and they've gone from being kind of mostly UK based to now having a huge American footing, and that's been fun sorting that out with them.
So for that client, do you provide everything from employer's liability to public liability to indemnity to everything for them?
We do provide all their insurances at present, yeah. So
okay. So obviously you're quite experienced in the industry. You've taken on the family reins, as it were, as the head of Imbers. I know your brother Matt also works with you, and Sven, isn't it?
Yeah, Sven is the middle one. I say middle one. There's actually four of us working for the company. Myself, and then Sven. He tends to look after. I'm probably only about 20% dealing with insurance and 80% running the business and doing all the compliance and various awful behind the scenes things that any small business will understand. Sven is the next eldest, and he kind of has a couple of sectors he looks after. Then Matt is the youngest of us three elder brothers, and he looks after the kind of market operators, event organizers. He does a little bit of this. He does a lot of the testers, and he does our kind of general commercial stuff that doesn't require my involvement.
Oh, that's really good. So obviously COVID-19 hit the UK. Everyone went into lockdown. What changes has Imbers made in terms of how you're operating? Obviously, we can see behind you, you are working from home, same as I am, same as many other people. Has it affected you much? Has there been any issues?
Yes, there haven't been too many issues, thankfully. We were getting prepared for it. We had foreseen it coming. We had already been working on arranging workloads so they could be done from home anyway. Our database went live and accessible from home the week before the lockdown.
Okay.
I literally had signed off on it with the IT company on my last day before I went on lockdown. I went a week before everyone else because I have a fairly gnarly commute through London and Croydon, and have to rely on buses and trains. And Croydon's currently a COVID hotspot, so I'm
really?
And the bus I would catch to get to the station goes to the hospital. So
yeah, not
usually keen on travelling that route at present. So thankfully we were pretty much prepared. Within a week of us being on lockdown, we had access to everything. So yeah, it was a bit of a learning curve, a few kind of teething issues as we were trying to get everything sorted, and not everyone was sorted at the same time. Obviously, they got the people that needed the most access done first. We bought laptops for staff that didn't have their own computers, so that was a little bit of an extra expense, and getting everything up and running was a further expense, but at least that's done for the future.
Yeah, at least you're future-proof now, so if we get another COVID-19 hit or COVID, whatever it may be, or any other future disaster plan, you've got it in place ready to go.
Well, that's it. We did have quite a strong business continuity plan, but it wasn't quite based around pandemics. So there's more in case where you had a fire or a flood and we couldn't access things for a week or two, which is partly why we were integrating these things already. So it just turned out to be a little bit wider in scope than we were expecting to have to apply.
I don't think you're the only person. I think everybody is in the same boat there. I know anyone that's tried dealing with the banks at the moment, and anyone that's tried dealing with anything to do with large call centers and whatnot, they're all struggling. But it's what it is. What it is. It is. I hate the word unprecedented, but it is an unprecedented time. There's not really a lot we can do about it. We've just got to make the best of a bad situation from the terms of our business. So obviously, if I can cover a couple of questions, people have sent me some questions beforehand. I've got a couple of questions popped up on the comments, which I'll put up at the end of this. But one of the questions people are sort of asking is, obviously there's lots of insurers in the market. Not everyone does leisure. One of the older insurance brokers, leisure insurer, obviously, who you're well aware of, people are claiming they've gone bust. I know that's not quite actually technically true. Maybe you can explain in layman's terms what's actually happened there in terms of that company, because obviously there's a technical term of runoff and things like that. So maybe you could just clarify things a little bit like that, if you could.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, they haven't gone bust. All that happened was, I say all that happened, it's still quite a big thing. They lost their carrier. For a lot of us that want to do kind of more niche business types, the only way you could do it appropriately is you design a product, you speak to X amount of insurance companies, then you find one or maybe a panel of them that come together, and they will agree to do your product and agree pricing with you and various other things about what you can and can't do and so on. And so their carrier, which was Catlin, or by the time that they gave up, it was AXA Catlin XL, because Catlin bought XL and then AXA bought Catlin all over the recent period. And they decided that they didn't want to carry on their relationship with Leisure Insure.
Okay.
So, the reasons for that will be between them and Leisure Insure. In most things, for example, we have a carrier that we have behind us for our leisure business, or most of the leisure business. Occasionally, we do stuff off that.
Yeah.
But normally you'd have like a 3-year contract, like it appears to be the case with Leisure Insure, and you normally have a 90-day cancellation period from either side. So that became apparent when they turned around and started saying we can only do new business for another 30 days. And that's the first sign that the carrier has probably gone. And then after that, all they could do is renew business that's existing.
Okay.
And then depending on how the carrier is kind of feeling towards your account, they may cease trading with you altogether, or they may still allow things to carry on. So you can add extra inflatables or just increase the items that you need to do. Sometimes you can't, and there's various reasons for that. Leisure Insure have decided to call it a day. So hence why they've been recommending us recently.
That's good.
Yes, that's it. We've been rivals a long time. We haven't always seen eye to eye, but we probably never would have done. But with most of our competitors, even if you don't necessarily like them or their practice or anything else, and sometimes you do like things about them, there are things that you can learn from all your competitors, good or bad. And one of the key things that we learned is at least keep speaking to them, and something good may come of it. And sometimes we do this on certain other lines of business. We have certain other competitors where our products almost kind of dovetail with. So sometimes we'll immediately pass them on to our competitor, and likewise they'll pass things that don't suit them straight on to us. It makes it easier for everyone. It means the client gets the right package at the right price. We're not trying to do things that we don't understand or are uncomfortable with. It's great when those things happen. Yeah, so as much as in some ways I'm happy as a competitor to see a competitor go, I also don't think it's especially good for the industry.
No.
Because the classic supply and demand example, the less supply there is, and if the demand remains the same, the worse it's going to be for the industry. It's not necessarily going to be terrible, but if you lose another one or two, that
I
could
think
be.
many years ago it went down to Leisure Insure being the only supplier for insurance, and anyone that's been in the industry a while remember I certainly had my premiums almost double overnight when they were the only ones left, and they essentially had the industry over a barrel because it was them or nobody. So yeah, competition is healthy. And what you were saying there about speak to your competitors, the bouncy castle or leisure industry is one that is, there's lots of competition, lots of rivalry. You see it on the Facebook forums, but actually everybody talks, everybody has a laugh, everybody will go out for a drink when the shows. Obviously, you've been out with us and various other people for a drink at the bar after the supply show, things like that. And I think it's important. It is really important. I'm friends with lots of my competitors, and they bail me out, and I've bailed them out. That is really important. Just a quick one. We have had a question come through about Ireland from, while we're talking about Leisure Insure dropping out and things like that. Owen, apologies if I pronounce it wrong, McMahon. Bill, would you insure businesses on Ireland? I know Leisure Insure sort of pulled out of the market in Ireland and weren't able to. Is that something that you can look at in terms of your policy? I know that there's a slightly different ruling over there from what I understand.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's not something we can do, and we're looking to do. Funnily enough, I have been approached by 3 brokers already in Ireland, but it's a pretty gnarly situation. I do believe the government is finally looking into some of the circumstances that are making it so unpalatable for other countries to offer insurance to Ireland. Unfortunately, after USA, Canada, it has the most or the worst reputation with regard to claims. There are a lot of awards that are given that wouldn't be given in the UK or other parts of Europe, which really doesn't help. And we actually, going back to the reinsurance side, which used to be the main aspect of GM Imber Limited's business, we were the most well-known non-Irish reinsurance broker, so we were heavily involved in Irish business.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I believe the government are starting to address it now, and I'm hoping they will. I think that Allianz and Aviva might be the only places, and I'm not sure if they're through specific brokers or not, and it's specific packages. But they're the only 2 that I know at the moment that, while considering a lot of the leisure risks.
Okay, so it's worth those people who are in Ireland to try and contact those or the local brokers, which I'm sure they're probably doing already. Because the way I understand it is the market just the rug essentially got pulled from under their feet overnight, as it were, from what I understand. We're in a much more fortunate position in the UK with insurance than obviously in Southern Ireland, the guys over there. So it is a difficult one for them. So I've had some more questions come through. We've got Stephen Ralph. I'm assuming he's just renewed because he's asked can he have his money back because he regrets renewing, but we'll move on for that and I'll let you speak to Stephen later on. Now, there's been a couple of talks about COVID-19 hiring. It's a very emotive subject. I'm sure if you follow any of the forums, there's been lots of personal opinion and there's been lots of talk about essential, and actually there's nothing in the rules that say about only essential businesses can operate. But what people say about government guidelines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I could go on. Obviously, my personal opinion is, as a hire company at the moment, we're not hiring. I never say never, but I know some hire companies are hiring, and there are people out there that are delivering to back gardens, and they're making claims like things like, I've made a quick note of them, so they're guaranteed to be clean and virus free. Is that actually something that you can say, really, in terms of, as an insurer, what's your stance on the whole hiring thing and the sort of risk assessments that hirers need to take? What would your advice be to a customer of yours or someone that spoke to you about it?
Okay, this has come up a few times, and hopefully I'll remember all the points. On a personal opinion, I think people should try and avoid hiring, simply because the more hires go on, the greater the potential for the whole situation continuing is there. And I'd rather that we try to get back to normal ASAP. But the reality is that people have bills to pay.
Totally.
Won't specifically be saying you can't trade at the moment. I'm aware of 2 or 3 of our clients who are currently trading, and a couple more I'm expected to be trading in the next week or so.
Okay.
And that's their call. The policy is there. Where there are issues are with regards to coronavirus. It cannot be excluded under employer's liability. So if you did have an employee that caught it, then that would be covered under a policy. That doesn't matter who you're with. It's a statutory requirement that everyone has 5 million employer's liability. And if you read your employer's liability certificate, it will normally say you have a minimum of 5 million rather than saying you have 10 million or whatever limit you have.
Okay.
And that's simply so you can't exclude certain things. And coronavirus will be one of those, terrorism, asbestosis, or other ones. And they cannot be excluded, full stop. Now, saying they cannot be excluded doesn't mean that the insurance company doesn't have to pay a claim. They will have to pay claims, but that doesn't mean they won't sue you afterwards for being an irresponsible company.
Right.
Now, the success of that situation is quite limited, to be fair. So I couldn't name a single case off the top of my head where they've successfully sued someone, but it is something they can potentially do.
Okay.
Excuse me. Public liability, that's different. You'll probably find that it's specifically excluded. So unless public liability was originally covered under your policy, it won't be covered all of a sudden. Our policy, we've now stuck out an endorsement for everyone, so they know specifically they're not covered for it. It wasn't covered before, but it's there to make certain that people do understand it's not covered.
And when you say not covered, do you mean if someone was maybe to, God forbid, catch coronavirus through cross-contamination, or if you happen to pass it on to somebody else, then the insurer wouldn't support that? Is that what you're saying there?
Yes, in theory, the insurance company, as soon as they found out it was a coronavirus-related claim, would stop offering either cover or legal support, because there's 2 elements to public liability. One of them is obviously paying any claim at the end of the day, but the other part, what people underestimate, is actually dealing with a claim before it reaches a settlement. Okay. So as soon as they realise, they will pull the cover and stop helping you. They may possibly, out of the goodness of their heart, which I slightly doubt, will offer the cover to short term to help deal with the legal situation. But yes, it's
so in terms of, obviously that is if someone catches coronavirus, but what about in terms of you as an insurer? So for instance, you look after my hire company. If I was hiring, what would you expect as sort of a responsible hirer? What would you suggest that if I rung you up, now for us, we're not hiring, but if I rung you up and said, Bill, we want to operate, what do we need to do to make sure that we're doing it safely? I know there's been lots of lists posted online and various PPE lists and various non-contact deliveries. The guys at BCN have produced some great graphics and things like that. But what, from your point of view, would you expect me to do to show that I've demonstrated I've carried out a proper risk assessment about it? What would you expect from me as a hirer, or anybody that's watching as a hirer?
There's only limited advice I can give because it's not really my realm of authority. And I would suggest you do check with HSE if you can, see if they've got anything available. I don't believe they do as yet.
No.
And the other thing is that some of the clients that I've spoken to have been doing is contacting the local council. If you can get the green light from the local council and you've submitted a proposal, some examples are not using the units too frequently. So you might be leaving it to, after you've cleaned it, leaving it so it's not being used for another week, 2 weeks, whatever.
Yeah.
And setting it up and making sure you've got no contact with the hirer or hiree. So basically going through a side entrance if they've got a side entrance, and keeping the social distancing in place and doing everything you realistically can do to minimize. But I would really suggest that it's technically the HSE's responsibility, because the insurance company will follow what the advice they give.
Yeah.
So if the HSE say it's fine, you're 99% likely the insurance company will back that. If not, they will state why they're not backing it, and you will know.
Okay.
So go with HSE guidance, speak to the local council. That they're the first port of call. Put together a good presentation and show what steps you are taking to minimize the risk of contamination, and good terms of business or hire agreement is going to be really important, and highlighting the fact that both the people that you're hiring it to understand the situation, that they're not having a party and having lots of people over, because potentially they could still come after you even if they didn't catch it from your equipment, but because they've caught it because their son or daughter's been bouncing with someone else's kids and they've caught it off them. So they could try and hold you liable for that. It's pretty far-fetched, but these situations do happen, and it's you could be held down as being a level of contributory negligence.
Oh, okay. So it's not necessarily your kit can be the cleanest there, but because you've not directly but indirectly encouraged that social gathering and someone's
absolutely. You cannot just say that you've got no involvement, because you have. You're receiving money for doing this, and you are partially culpable if they decide to find you that way. It could also depend. There'll be other factors involved, like the supervision and various other things. But the fact that you are involved, and the way that solicitors tend to deal with things now they tend to be kind of throw the mud, see where it sticks, and just name everyone when they're litigating, and see where it falls, and it'll be tough.
So just to sort of sum up what you're saying there, really, it's a robust risk assessment. It's speaking to your local authorities, and it's making sure you've got everything documented. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, documentation is the key, irrespective of the current situation. The better the level of staff training and risk assessment that you have, the better you are going to be standing with any claim you have, especially on things like this where people are going to be extra sensitive. And if you do have an incident, people are going to be even more critical than they would be in a normal environment. So that is kind of worth remembering. So
you mentioned about claims there, coming away from the whole hiring during COVID thing. Obviously you see firsthand more than the likes of myself and other hirers in the industry and other manufacturers. What's the claims history been like? Yes, we hear about obviously the awful tragedies that happen, that hit the press where there's a fatality and things like that. But what's the claims history generally been like over the last 12, 24 months or so?
Well, our general experience is that round about 1 in 3 to 1 in 6 claims do eventually get paid out.
Okay.
Sometimes that's because there wasn't a legitimate claim there. Sometimes it's because people can't be bothered to see it through, or it's such a minor thing they don't want to bother. Sometimes it's just too awkward or too complicated or too stressful. So, we would expect 1 in 3 to 1 in 6 to get paid out. It varies mainly on the type of equipment we found. Certain things pose far greater hazard than others.
Okay.
So that could also be down to the prevalence of that item being hired, because whilst we have lists of people's kit, we don't know how often that 15 by 15 inflatable goes out compared to the bungee run.
Yeah.
So we don't have particular data on that. All we see is that assault courses, for example, and slides, we see more claims than we do on your average inflatable.
Okay.
And that's the way it is. We do kind of keep a watching brief on certain items that may fluctuate in price. Some things will come down over time. Some things will go up.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's been quite good. My concern is that if there is a recession, which seems increasingly likely with the current situation, more people will make claims. And that's normally something we see in the insurance industry before a recession is announced, is that you just start seeing an increase in claims, both legitimate and non-legitimate. People just trying their hand.
So in terms of claims, if something happens, what advice can you give to hirers? So they're at an event, they might not be supervising, they might have dropped it off in the back garden, they're supervising, they've come back and someone's notified them that little Johnny's broken his arm whilst playing on the bouncy castle. That's the first sort of instance. And then the second one would be if they're at an event, then they are supervising the inflatable, so obviously they're taking a lot more responsibility for it there. What advice would you give to hirers in the best way to deal with that? Should they wait until they get the solicitor's letter, or should they notify you or their insurer, whoever that may be, straight away? What's the sort of best port of call? Because I've heard that if you tell the insurance company it doesn't actually happen, then you get the policy loaded again later on because they think you might get a claim, but actually nothing comes to. What's the situation there? What's the best thing for them to do?
That is a minor issue, I would suggest, but the first thing I would suggest anyone does is try to get a little bit of information, be sympathetic, try not to take it personally, and because it is easy to take things personally, especially when they're quite negative and quite often horrible, because you'll be upset if someone got injured through something you did. It's only natural. Don't allegedly. Just see if you can try and get as much useful information, ideally if there are any witnesses, and just try and get some basic information without being overly invasive. So don't go around like the paparazzi taking photographs of people and being too intrusive, because that can be unpleasant. That can count against you later. But if you can be shown to be sympathetic and try to address concerns, get the information that you need, try and find out who witnessed it that is there, and see if you can establish a way to locate them later. You might not necessarily feel it's appropriate to take someone's details there and then at the time, but if you can establish that they knew, for example, the person that was running the venue, or or someone that knows them, then that's a lot easier. Then speak to the insurance company as soon as you can. The problem being is if you don't and it comes up later, they can refuse to deal with it unless you've got a good reason why you haven't notified it. Otherwise, let them know. Sometimes things will go away when we have a situation where we don't think there's likely to be a claim. So you can if you can, ask some polite, sensitive questions around that. Try and see if you can make a judgment for yourself within a realistic level, and think, okay, well, I don't think there's going to be a claim, so we can speak to the insurance company and suggest it's a notification only.
Okay.
They don't have to deal with it on quite as serious a level, so they can then make that call after they've discussed things with you and think, okay, we actually think this is more serious than you said, or we think it's less serious. So then as soon as the ball's in their park, it's not so much your problem anymore. So in theory, cover should attach, as long as you've not broken any other policy conditions and you've done what it says in the policy wording.
Okay, so the important thing is read your policy wording. And in terms of, obviously, you're dropping off in a house, which is a massive part of the industry, in a back garden, and there's an incident that happens there where you're not there, that you've got your paperwork signed, you've got your disclaimer. I know disclaimers, technically, the whole technicality around those, but you've got your paperwork signed. Would there still be an issue there with the insurance? Would the insurer still come into play there?
Yes, disclaimers will only stand up to a certain level. There are still arguments that are not linked to the disclaimer, such as if you've provided staff, were the staff adequately trained? Did anyone that you've let supervise the equipment understand what they're supposed to be doing? Some things are simpler than others. So, just watching people bouncing on your average bouncy castle is far less onerous than attaching bungee cords to people and things like that, which someone might actually do incorrectly.
Right.
So a lot of it's about common sense. The easier to follow your instructions in terms of business are, the less likely you're going to find out they get challenged in court if it does go that far, where someone says, these people shouldn't really have, understood this. You should have explained it better. And the reality is you're receiving an income for this. You owe the greater duty of care. So, as long as you try to keep things as simple as possible and as realistic as possible, you've just got to try and make it as user-friendly as you can. And the more user-friendly it is, the harsh reality is you've got to treat people like they're idiots. That's how you have to look at things. They've done the dummies guide to this and that, and just try and imagine you're doing the same thing when you put out a hire guide, because these people are not professional, and as such they won't be judged as professional if it does hit court. And
you're talking about there the mum or dad that you're giving responsibility of that inflatable over to.
Yes, absolutely. If it's too complicated for them to understand, the court would just turn around and say that this was not an appropriate terms of hire, and he will almost certainly be found liable.
Okay, so we've had another question from Matthew Goodwin. I'll pop it up on the screen. I know you've part answered this. How useful are disclaimers, and to what point will they cover you up to?
I think they're moderately useful because it may put people off making a claim, but most importantly, it encourages, or should encourage you, to highlight what can go wrong, what people need to look out for, and hopefully also remind yourself what can go wrong. Hopefully you've got a checklist too, but disclaimers, then probably not going to stand up in court. The fact that you had one will be a useful point because it shows that at least you're showing that level of care.
Yeah.
But
I think they use the term legally waiting to help in a defence or something like that as a technical term.
So that's it. It shows that you are taking a level of a duty of care to a certain extent.
Okay. So obviously there's a mass at the moment, there's going to be mass insurance claims across every single sector in terms of the loss of earnings, business interruption. It's going to be astronomical. So what's the situation with insurance premiums for the leisure industry? And I've seen a couple of Facebook posts where people are posting that their premiums, they've negotiated premiums to stay at the same or reduce in a lot of aspects. What's the situation, or do you think the situation? Obviously, you've not got a crystal ball, so you can never say what's going to happen with them in the future. But in your experience, what do you think is going to happen with insurance premiums?
I think they're more likely to go up, than down. It's possible that some insurers might reduce costs, but we were entering a hard market before this, so prices were going up. Insurers were pulling out of certain lines of business, as we've just seen with leisure insure. That reduces supply, which in theory increases premiums. To a certain extent, for those of us with binding authorities, we can guarantee a price for a certain period of time.
Okay.
Ours, for example, renews. We renew our contract at the end of September.
Right.
So I could turn around and say that we're not going to get a price increase until, probably July, August. The reality is we won't get one till September or later. But guaranteeing one any further ahead than your binder technically renews, people can't do that. If they're saying
the binder is your agreement with whoever you're doing business through.
Yeah, that's it. So our main insurer, in our case, Syndicate DTW. So our agreement with them is due at the end of September. So we can pretty much guarantee anything until then. I don't foresee there being a massive change, though there could be. Part of it will depend on our claims starting to be made. How have things gone? If there's a bit of reduced income, because a lot of people won't be renewing because they're not trading, which is totally understandable.
Yeah, yeah.
How many claims were there in the period for their financial year before that? And various other considerations. I would expect claims to be down. I would expect that to help the pricing.
Okay. Can I interrupt you there? I've got one question from Paul Grubb. Now, obviously, he appreciates that premiums are going up when we have less business, and why are there no claims discounts not really a factor anymore? So why don't I think what he's asking is, why do hirers not get like a no claims discount, like on your car insurance or on your home insurance? How come that doesn't come into play, so that you essentially reward the good hirers from the bad, or do you? But actually, we don't know about it.
I can't speak for everyone. We try to reward certain people over a period of time. The reality is that, one, there just aren't enough policies, and it's hard to get quality data, and two, you have to start overcharging. So when people start trading, they need to be paying, like on motor insurance, where a new driver is paying 2 to 3 times what a driver is. And unless we suddenly restructure the industry like that, it is a problem. And it means you're artificially charging people an excessive amount. If people are pricing appropriately, a no claims discount becomes irrelevant, because you're already being rewarded by appropriate pricing.
Okay.
Prices will go up and down. Prices are more likely to go up in time, simply because, as someone that's dealt with this for over 20 years, prices are lower than they were 20 years ago, and there's no justification for that.
Really?
The only reason the prices are lower now than they were back then is because of competition, which is a good thing. But the problem is that bubble might have burst. We've seen Leisure Insure pull out. Campbellford Law have pulled out, who probably won't be as well a known name, but they had 2 insurers that they did things with. That's 3 people in the last 6 months that have stopped trading in this industry. There might be more.
Okay. So just to pick up on the competition, obviously there's several insurers in the market. I've read that some of the insurers are using, like FML did back in the day, an offshore person or broker or insurance company, whichever way you want to put it, to actually put their business through. And I personally was always a bit concerned about having it offshore. Does it have the same protection as a sort of UK or European, whichever way you want to say, an insurance, same protection? Is there a difference in that?
Yes and no. I should also add, I don't know who is using anyone offshore at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
I think all of the main competitors I'm aware of are using companies that are regulated in the UK.
Okay.
If you use companies that are regulated outside the UK, that's up to the Financial Conduct Authority and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme to decide when they get involved.
Right.
So if the foreign insurer goes bust, technically you have to go back to the country where they are regulated. Often you find they're in places like Malta, Gibraltar, and minor places where they don't have the financial stability that we do over here.
Yeah.
And as such, mostly the FSCS has been dealing with the majority percentage of claims that come to them. They might draw the line at some stage. They are talking about penalising brokers and insisting on higher premiums for companies that insist on using offshore insurers, because if they don't have the financial strength, why should everyone else pick up the burden? So that there are discussions behind the scenes as to whether people should be penalised more for getting these cheaper quotes from companies, which are mostly good, but the problem is that a lot of them haven't been around long enough and don't have the level of data to kind of keep on.
Those companies you might see gradually start to increase their premiums as they actually get a bit more experience within the industry, maybe. In terms of
it tends to happen. It's easy to keep price low when you first start as well, because you don't have any other claims to deal with. So you come straight in with a clean balance sheet and you can start doing things straight away. Whereas you're up against lots of other insurers that do have these historic things, and most claims that they say the average PL claim takes 3.5 to 4.5 years to be settled in the UK. And obviously a lot will be faster, some will take far longer than that. And that obviously kind of exacerbates, so a new company doesn't have any of that stress to worry about. Whereas on the other hand, the big Avivas, the AXAs that have been around for ages, have the big balance sheets. So there are pros and cons.
Okay. So I've got a couple of other comments here as well. Paul Grubb has just mentioned that FML, aka Primo PLC, have confirmed that they will cover if they catch a disease, however, will be defended vigorously via public liability insurers, likewise for ELI, employers liability insurance. Obviously, I just recommend that anyone who is insured with Primo PLC have a conversation with them, really. I wouldn't have thought you can comment on that, but it's nice to know that people are with their insurers.
If they've said that, I've not seen that stated anywhere. That doesn't mean it's not true. So if they're stating that, then that's presumably a good thing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good thing.
I'd be curious to know which insurance company they're currently using. Last I looked, they were using the same as 3 other brokers, but
oh, really?
We'll see.
So is that like you mentioned they're using three other brokers are using the same insurance policy? Is it similar to fleet insurance, where if, say, I'm with AXA and I try and put my business out with 3 brokers to get the cheapest possible deal, a lot of them will come back to me and say, "Oh, AXA won't quote because broker X has already got that business." Is that the case?
Absolutely so. Yes, there's probably about 8 or 9 brokers still offering insurance to the inflatable industry on a regular basis, and several of those are using the same market.
Okay, interesting to know. So Paul Grubb also has asked a question which picks up a little bit about training. So are insurers going to recognise the businesses who RPI train all their staff? Now, I wouldn't necessarily say it has to be RPI training. There might be another form of recognised training, but I think the important thing there is recognised training for their staff for supervision. And would that then help reduce premiums?
Apart from, I think potentially it could do in the long run. Apart from the fact they may have to artificially increase the price for others, to subsidise the people who are taking extra preventative measures. I don't see why they shouldn't. I think it's a good idea, and the better the risk management, I do think the better the discount or premium insurers should be offering, and that's absolutely correct. We don't offer certain discounts for mass groupings like some people try to arrange, but we do try to offer discounts for the better level of management. The better the risk management, the more likely you are to keep low premiums for a longer term. But it also has to be reflected in how the market is doing as a whole.
Right.
So whilst you would, in theory, you should have a lower premium than your average competitor, that doesn't mean your premiums won't go up because the whole market is doing poorly.
There might be lots and lots of claims being paid out, and the actual overall risk to the market might increase. So actually,
no different to motor insurance, which is currently going up because it's been making a loss for ages. It's not been going up by a huge amount, but it has been going up.
Yeah. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about specific equipment. Matthew Goodwin's got a question. Why are disco domes and Velcro walls so much more expensive than other units? Now, I'm not sure if Matthew is insured with yourself. I don't quite know who he's insured with, but do you at Imbers charge more money for certain bits of kit on a standard policy? I know there's turnover policies.
We do have items that cost more than others, but we would consider both of those to be standard units. We wouldn't charge more for those than your average inflatable. There is an argument maybe for the disco domes with regards to if they've got sound speakers and things like that, that you've got more likely of there's a greater likelihood of having an injury if someone comes into contact with them. But
you've probably got more of a issue with a Velcro wall where someone's somersaulting onto a wall personally, but
yeah, I was going to say that the Velcro wall, funny enough, used to be something that we had a problem with about 15 years ago. I don't know whether it's because we insure far less of them now, but we haven't had a Velcro wall claim for probably
one of my higher fleet.
But yeah, we haven't seen a Velcro wall claim in ages, and we have priced them accordingly. But they
Matthew just said that he's insured. He is currently insured with Leisure Insurer, and he got told about the Velcro wall. It's due to back injury claims, which I can sort of understand.
I can understand. We certainly used to see more of them, but as I said, I'm not sure whether it's because we don't insure many per se, or the claims aren't happening like they used to. But I can't remember the last time I saw a Velcro wall claim. Certainly not the last 5 years. Yeah. Not on my clients anyway.
Obviously you don't know what other insurers are doing. So obviously we've got about 10 minutes left. So obviously it's a very difficult time for hirers at the moment in terms of do they renew, don't they renew? I know Stephen Ralph, obviously earlier on, Stephen's a customer of mine and a good friend. He renewed his policy at the start of the COVID stuff, and a lot of people were the same. I had a phone conversation with you, and I rang you up and said, "What can I do?" What sort of situations of people? What situations, but what options have people got in terms of renewals and deferments and not bothering to renew their policies? What can they do? What sort of advice would you give? I know what you gave me that suited my company, but obviously as a general thing, what can you advise people?
This year's been very unusual, so we've taken the step of calling everyone rather than just writing to them first, to just try and see what they feel suits them the most, so that we can try and work out an appropriate quote for them. We do have multiple options that we can do. So for some people, if they're not trading at all, and they don't care about theft and damage to their kit, some of them just aren't renewing. Which is fine. Their business will hold, might not do anything for a couple of months, might not do anything for the rest of the year. A lot of them are saying they'll come back when they're ready to trade. Some people are insuring just their kit. So we're covering theft and damage, plus all the fire, flood, lightning, explosion, and so on. So we're offering people to cover kit only if that's what they want. We're offering to add employer's liability if they have furloughed staff, because you still do need EL if you have your staff furloughed. We can offer public liability on a different basis. So, for example, if you have a premises and you might still be attending meetings and conducting certain elements of your business, you still ought to have some public liability. So what we would normally do is charge a token price for that, which is about 50 quid. And what we would do is that's basically so you can carry on visiting people but not hiring, and just helping promote your business and have meetings and do all the other necessities behind the scenes, and your business still has public liability cover. What we will then do is that when people are ready to add the hire side back on, we'll then add the hire kit back on, charge the appropriate PL, take off the figure that we've already charged, the 50 quid figure or whatever it is, based on what they do, and just deal with that accordingly as and when they start trading again. We are also, for larger customers that often have more than one string to the bow, so whilst they might not be doing a lot of what they do, they still want to be able to do something at the drop of a hat, or they have some manufacturing or testing or some other kind of side to their business they want to carry on doing if possible. So most of those clients we've changed so people can have things on a reduced turnover basis.
That's exactly what you did with me.
That's it. So what we do is we look at what their turnover is anticipated for this year, compare it to what it was for last year, rate the policy on the same basis, then apply the discount based on the new turnover, and then we will charge an adjusted figure at the end of the year if figures have surpassed what was expected.
Yeah, and that's about being honest, isn't it, really? And having the conversation, really, as ringing up whoever their insurer is and speaking to them. I know you were very helpful with me. I think we actually got our policy down less than half of what it was last year, but we've decided to keep it running so that if we do suddenly need to do something, we can. Obviously, we've got a big testing and repair side of the business as well. So we've had another question from Phil Blunt. Now, part of this you're probably going to be able to answer, and part I would suggest he drops you an email. But what price would rodeo balls or wipeout be to insure with yourselves? My insurance, the wipeout is a lot lower than price than the rodeo bull. Well, Phil, what I would say first of all is, in order to get an individual quote, I'll pop Bill's details up just before we finish, so you've got them. But maybe Bill can talk a little bit about the wipeout and bulls and the price difference in insuring the both of them potentially.
Yeah, wipeouts are, I want to say relatively new, but they've probably been around for about 5 years or something now. Showing my age, and everything seems to go past so fast these days. We're just starting to see claims for them. Initially, we started off with them at a higher price. The price then adjusted downwards quite heavily, and we might be knocking it back up at some stage, but we are starting to see more claims, though most of them haven't been paid out yet. So we don't want to knock the price back up and find out that we're just seeing an increase in people suggesting that that's what's caused an accident. Certainly the two wipeout claims I can think of off the top of my head, both I feel don't stack up. So we're hoping they're going to go away.
Okay.
There's no justification for a price increase. But the rodeo bulls, we've not seen as many claims as well. But the problem with the rodeo bull claim is they tend to be quite expensive.
Right.
Your average inflatable claim is probably 10 to 15K. Your average rodeo bull claim is probably 25K plus.
Hence why it's a lot more expensive to insure. I think a rodeo bull used to be around about, on an individual policy, about £1,000, if not more, to insure.
Well, that's it. We start off with a high price, so then we bring in discounts for various safety features.
Yeah, well, that's really good. So I got, just to come back very, very quickly to the whole hiring during the virus, and I can't remember whether they said it or not, but people guaranteeing that their kit is clean and virus free. That's not something they can say, is it?
No, always try and avoid extreme.
And fully insured is another word I see quite often as well.
Fully insured always makes me upset when I see that. There's no such thing as fully insured. You cannot guarantee it's virus free. Don't try not to say it. It's asking for trouble if things do go wrong. I get it's a selling. It's a way to sell things, but it's going to bite you if it does go wrong. Just suggest things like we make every endeavor to check and things like that, and point out what you do to make you a really good service and help promote yourself, but try to avoid extremes, because in event of a claim, that's going to cause you no end of problems.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, I think we're going to leave it there unless anybody else has got any other questions. But before I sort of sign off, first of all, Bill, thank you very much for taking the time. We've been online for nearly an hour now, chatting about what arguably sometimes is one of the most boring subjects in the world, insurance. But there's been lots of golden nuggets learned. I've learned some new things. So thank you very much for taking the time out. I know, obviously, you were the first person that I asked to sit in on this. Likewise, for those people, if you want to get involved and you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you want to see someone in particular, I've got a couple of people I'm speaking to at the moment. to do with a live Q&A, and I'm also looking to get a few hirers on from different parts of the country to get your take on what you're doing at the moment. Completely friendly, completely impartial, and likewise for manufacturers. I know we've branded it as Magic Air, but I'm quite happy to sit here and have conversations with other manufacturers. As Bill said in the beginning, the whole point is that we work together to get through this whole thing together. But what I would say, once I can finish on one thing, what I would say is those hirers that are going out hiring, okay, I've said my personal opinion, Bill said his, don't reduce your prices if you are. The amount of extra work involved, if you're actually doing things properly, i.e. you're going through all the PPE, you're actually doing the things that you're meant to do, you're cleaning it, you're doing everything you're meant to do, it's actually costing you more time and more money in order to do it. So don't lower your prices. If anything, personally, you'd be sort of wise to put your prices up. So the best thing to do is put your prices up to actually sustain the extra work that you're going to have to do. But again, Bill, thank you very much. And thank you very much to the people that have sat on this evening. We've had quite a few people on this evening. And next week, it's the same time, same place on our Magic Air Facebook page, 6:30 p.m. And it is 6:30 p.m. on the 6th of May, 2020. Thank you very much.
Cheers.